Okay, we are live streaming. Juliet, I believe, is trying to get in, so hopefully we can kind of fill in for her as she makes her way here. Welcome, everyone. This is the fourth meeting of the Government Transition Advisory Committee's Districts and Council Operations Subcommittee. Today is Thursday, February 22nd, and we will be here from 11 to 1. My name is Julia Meyer. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the Engagement and Community Participation Manager for the transition. Our co-chairs, Jose and Juliet, will facilitate today's meeting. Next slide, please. It's going to take a moment to go over some meeting logistics. This meeting is being live streamed on YouTube and recorded for later viewing. A copy of the recording will be posted on the transition website under past meetings and events. For today's meeting, we have closed captioning available. To access closed captioning, you can click on the CC button on the bottom of your screen. For committee members, please take this moment to change your chat settings to everyone so that folks listening in can follow along. And please remember that the chat is part of the public meeting record. For community members listening in, we have the Zoom Q&A feature available. You can submit comments or questions through the Q&A function. We may not always answer all of your questions live during the meeting, but we do read them and they also become part of the public meeting record. At today's meeting, we are not taking verbal public comment. If you want to give verbal public comment to the full Government Transition Advisory Committee, you can sign up now to do that at our next meeting, which is March 13th. Or you can give public comment at any time in writing through our online form on the transition website, or by emailing us at transition@portlandoregon.gov. You can also give public comment by calling 311. Next slide, please, and I'll turn it over to Jose to review today's agenda.
Thank you, Julia. Today's agenda includes subcommittee business in district offices. I'm sure everyone's looking forward to that. Onboarding recommendations and our plan to gather input on districts and council operations. Before we adjourn our meeting today, we'll agree to next steps. Next slide, please. Destiny is unable to attend today's meeting. Otherwise, we expect full attendance. We need to approve the January 19th meeting summary. Does anyone have any proposed revisions before I take a motion to approve? Seeing none, do we have a motion to approve? Joe? You're muted.
Thanks. Julia, I suggested one change, and I know that you made it at least in one place, and I want to make sure you made it everywhere. I don't remember what it was, but it was a typo that changed the meaning of something.
You have to remind me what it was.
Yeah, well, if I can, there was one typo in the original version, and I'd like to reserve the right to go back and find what it was and make sure that it's changed in the official version, if that's okay, Jose.
Yeah, Joe, that works. Especially if it was already approved in one place, that should be okay. So I'll engineer a motion to approve with those changes.
Yeah, I'll make that motion.
Perfect. Do we have a second? I guess we're in subcommittee. Amy seconds. Do we have any objections? Seeing none, motion carries. Next slide, please. The working agreements as follows. In discussions, challenge ideas rather than individuals. Offer constructive suggestions. Approach different opinions with curiosity. Seek to understand. Keep the needs and concerns of the local community and the larger region at the forefront of the work. Arrive on time and prepared to the best of your ability. Let the group know if you're unable to attend a meeting. The co-chairs will aim to incorporate tools for breathers. Keep multitasking to a minimum. Keep focus on the objectives of the meetings. Utilize co-chairs to know additional topics for discussion by submitting topics in writing via email. Next slide, please. honor the decisions of the group, contribute to the overall success of the group by finding ways to participate that best meets your needs, step up and step back, collectively work to ensure that every member who wants to be heard is heard. And I will continue my practice that I've done before, that I will probably call on someone who hasn't spoken before, someone who has, even if they're not first in line. Embrace conflict and work with fellow committee members and staff to find ways to give each other feedback. The co-chairs will aim to incorporate various feedback tools. No, you can always email me or Juliet with feedback. Use I statements. Next slide, please. Okay, to reground folks, the City Council passed a resolution directing facilities to identify in-district offices available no later than January 1st, 2025, and to update council every 90 days of their progress. Council would have to approve the cost in the fiscal year 24-25 budget process. At our February 6th budget GTAC meeting, we received an update from facilities. Today, we want to have a discussion with facilities about the intersectionality of our work. Mary Satter from facilities will be here, and we are also going to be joined by Elise Rosenberg from the Bureau of Technology Services. Next slide, please. Okay, based on the facilities presentation last week, there's trouble finding the suitable space in District 1, East Portland. District 2 and 3 have viable options for in-district offices, both at the Kenton Firehouse in District 2 and Southeast Uplift in District 3. But of course, both of those spaces will require some work. And District 4 on the west side has two potential sites, the 1900 building and Northwest offices that might work. Concerns and uncertainty remain about programming, security, and cost. And due to these concerns and security, Council Chiefs of Staff have expressed interest in what GTAC has to say on the district offices. Next slide, please. GTAC's timeline has us releasing initial recommendations this summer and a final recommendation in September of 2024. So far, our subcommittee has found that most cities with district representation do not have in-district offices. There's a cost burden and safety and security concerns of running an in-district office year-round, and cities have found other ways to encourage in-district engagement, including town halls, pop-up offices, and partnerships with existing community assets to reduce cost. Though we haven't reached a recommendation or at our stage of work, we are about to enter a community input period phase where we anticipate asking Portlanders how we envision the city council members to balance their time between City Hall and the district to best serve the district's needs, and ask them how they feel a physical office within the district is essential to fulfilling their responsibilities for community engagement, or are alternative ways councilors can meet that responsibility. Based on GTAC meeting chat last week, there was an identified need to do community engagement on that topic. And we do want to ensure the community engagement is meaningful, that we want to hear, and what GTAC recommends can really influence decision making. And I know that even within our committee, we have various places where we all land on this discussion. So today we want to discuss how the city's path and our path support each other or don't. Now I'll turn it over to Elise and Maddie to share additional information. Next slide, please.
And so maybe before we begin, I want to introduce Elise Rosenberg, who I don't know if folks have met Elise. I know you've met me before. Maddie Sauter, I run fleet and facilities for the city. Elise, do you want to pop on camera and introduce yourself and your role?
Sure. Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Elise Rosenberg. I am the Deputy Director of the Bureau of Technology Services. We're quite involved in many of the efforts to help this government transition come to fruition within the city. And here, I'm particularly here to help with any questions around the connectivity issues that may arise around district offices, and how the programming, in other words, how you or the community envision using those spaces influence the type of network and connectivity that we would need in those spaces.
Thanks, Elise. And I'm sorry if there's some background noise. I'm at our fleet facility today, and it's a working facility, so it can get kind of loud. I might actually ask to go back one slide because there's some topics I want to pick up on and highlight a little bit. And the first is actually related to the timeline that's been presented. And so I'm realizing that I think that there's a piece of information that might be missing between the GTAC and council that's important, which is that facilities and BTS right now are operating under a resolution that was passed last November that directs us to have offices established and available that meet certain specifications by January 1st of 2025. And why that is relevant is because there is an awful lot of work that we as an implementing bureau are needing to do to meet that resolution and meet that directive, everything from property searches to some architectural planning to fiber planning to negotiating with Comcast to bringing in our security group to find security cameras and set up the security program. All of that is happening and in flight right now because we have to really have these sites on board by about October in order for them to be commissioned and ready for the new council by January 1st. And so something that I think I would like to add to this discussion is the timeline that GTAC's outlined, and I think I saw it in the timeline from February 12th when I was last with you guys. I realized that timeline is about a year too late. If we want to have the GTAC have a formative influence on really anything related to in-district offices, from whether we do them or not, to what shape they take, to where they are, to how they're programmed. And so you'll see a comment later in the slide deck that I've put forward, which is that I think probably actually the first order of business for GTAC with regard to its relationship with council is to assess whether or not you want us trundling along this path to essentially do the work and spend the money prior to your community engagement being done. And if you are not comfortable with that, you will have to make a recommendation to council very quickly that says, put this on pause, modify your resolution, kick it to next year, whatever you want, however you want to phrase it, so that facilities can halt work and BTS can halt work. Otherwise, if we don't have that directive from council, we will have to continue on in order to meet the bounds of the resolution. So I just wanted to make that really clear because I realized I think we were kind of going like this and didn't have clarity on that. And should I take questions as they come in? I can see that Juanita has a question, or do you want me to continue on, Julia?
It's a very quick question, Julia.
Yeah.
I just want to know, what is the timeline for us to give you the recommendation?
I need like a month.
A month? Okay, just give
Yeah.
us, because that is critical for us to make sure that we know when do we have to submit you a recommendation.
Yeah,
So
a couple weeks to a month, because we're looking to potentially sign leases. We are actively accruing costs against this project. And so that if we want to not have already spent a bunch of resource and time, we would have to know that really quickly and have that directive really quickly.
Thank you so much.
And if you have questions particularly just about the timeline, now the time, any other questions, let's wait till more of the presentation gets going to make sure we're not repeating questions. Joe?
Yeah, this is about the timeline. And Maddie, the two options that you seem to have posed are either delay the whole process or GTAC sort of is out of sync And I wonder if there's a third option of us somehow changing our timeline so that we can get into sync with yours. Clearly, you're moving on a fast track, and I don't think we want to slow it down, but I also don't think we want to check out of the process.
Yeah, Joe, that would be part of the conversation we're gonna have at the end of this for sure.
Thank you, Jose. I'm sorry.
So I think the two questions, and I will be forthright that what has concerned us and actually BTS as well is that right now, even the architectural process for this and the property search is really confounded by the fact that we don't have research such as that you're proposing to inform the programming. So right now we don't have a clear customer, we don't have a clear program. And so in terms of knowing what we're supposed to do in these spaces, the list of requirements is very generic. You know, it essentially has to, it's a space, it has some furniture, it has access to transportation, and it's got security. And you know, the question for me all along, and maybe this is just harkening back to a former career in urban planning and community engagement that I had, the question for me all this time has been, we can do this work and we can spend this money, but what problem are we really trying to solve here by creating district offices? And is it the right solution for the problem? Have we identified the problem enough to say that this is the solution? And I don't know if that's the case or not. So we had posed some questions. I see them at the bottom here that I think are the more fundamental questions that I would like us to maybe have an answer to before we proceed, because I think we are uncomfortable. And you know, really, which is, how do you see people balancing their time? Like, what is this role as compared to what the role has been historically? And what is the physical nature of that connection? And you'll recall we spoke to this back in October at the initial work sessions that resulted in a resolution, which is that I see this as being a really unique relationship between electeds and their community. But that relationship can manifest in all kinds of different ways and takes all different shapes and forms. And I don't think we want to predetermine that an office is the only way to have that relationship. And in some cases, what we're seeing in the districts is that could be really challenging. So for example, in District 1, all main roads do lead to downtown. So what happens when we have the best community meeting space that we've identified that's city owned, that's all the way next to the river? Like, how do people even get to that? Or do we want to make a more flexible solution? So for example, you could go to a school gym, you could go to the library, you could go to any of these places, none of which require an office to do. So I think that there's a lot of really fundamental questions about who are we serving? What problems are they trying to solve? What are the array of solutions that are available? And what are the costs and benefits of those different solutions prior to picking a pathway and then developing that? So if you go to the next slide, I tried to pull deep from my recesses of community engagement and really think about how would one responsibly work through these questions. And so I've sort of outlined what I think might be important. And there's a couple key pieces in here. The first is just scoping up the community engagement effort. I think you guys are working on that right now. What problem are we trying to solve? What is the shape and scale of the problem? Who does it affect? Who should be leading that engagement? Is it the GTAC? Is it a consulting entity? Is it facilities? Is it BPS? You know, who, Civic Life? Who does that? And then I think this is really important, is what implementing bureau should be your partner. Because what I have been seeing is this sort of dissonance between the citizen committees and the bureaus that are responsible and understand the processes for submitting budgets, meeting deadlines, resolutions, et cetera. You want to be in sync with an implementing bureau. And I think Elise and I are your implementing bureaus to say, okay, this is what you're trying to accomplish. This is what we would do. We would create a decision package. We would create a budget. We would get into the budget process. We would steward it in this way. And that way your work is synced up with the work of the city, the operational work of the city and the financial work of the city, so that everybody agrees and sees it coming. So I would do that scoping work. I would focus on research, and I threw out some different ways that I'm familiar with to do research. So for example, social media ads to push engagement processes, recruited, managed sample focus groups. You could do that in the districts. You could do that in, specific communities. trying to target what it is that they need. You could do an online questionnaire in case you don't pick people up in these focus groups. So there's all these different ways to go through and assess what needs they have, but then also to start posing trade-off questions like, well, how much are you willing to spend for that? Compare what their solutions are with the cost and risks or what their problems are with the cost and risks of the solutions available. So I think that this could be some really guided community engagement research. And then lastly, I think you could pull forward a prioritized list of solutions, and some of them may have physical aspects to them, and some may have more social aspects to them. So the solution we're trying to evolve could be very different depending on what these community groups express are their issues and needs. And so whatever your prioritized list of solutions are, I would then promote decision-making in alignment with your implementing bureau. Maybe your implementing bureau is civic life, because you actually have a social problem on your hand. You're not getting out into the community enough and meeting them where they're at in order for them to feel connected. Maybe what you have is a budgeting problem, right? And so your implementing bureau is the city budget office because they don't feel like they get to have a say in where the city puts its money. Maybe what you have is a physical access problem. I can't get to downtown. I need a site near me. We would be your implementing bureau in that case. But my concern is that we put this cart like way in front of the horse in terms of predetermining what the problem is and what the solution is as well. And that you guys don't have a clear partner in recommending a solution to council, which is critical for implementing at the city. One more slide, and then I think we can open it up to questions. So I just wanted to lay out, that engagement process from back in my urban planning days. Like that alone could be easily a 6-month process, maybe even longer, depending on what that engagement looks like. I was a consultant that did that type of work, and you want it to be not belabored, but you want to put the time into making sure that your research tools and focus groups are well constructed. So if that's a 6-month process, and you then determine that you need a physical solution, this is the typical design build process for physical solutions. So you have an initial budget, you work with an architect, you do schematic design development, you're doing cost estimating the entire way, you move into construction documents, and then you construct. And it's not articulated on here, but the parallel path is actually Elise's group coming in to figure out how a physical solution will connect with the city. So for example, if you're doing community meetings and you're expecting to be able to broadcast those community meetings, Elise's team is heavily involved in the programming, design development, all the way through CDs, because they have to create that broadcasting infrastructure for you and connect that to a contract with OpenSignal for OpenSignal to be able to provide that. Likewise, Manny Guerra's security program, that's a huge programming question. And that's where we're at right now, where we're kind of stymied is, do you just want a desk in a community center, or are you wanting an office? Because if it's an office, that would suggest this package of security improvements. Again, goes all the way through that design development process. So this also is a very long process that usually costs a lot of money. Our initial estimates on this are about $2 million. For 4 different locations. And so these are not cheap investments. And so that's where I guess I'd want to make sure that people understand it's worth doing the research to make sure that this is what you really want before we put the money aside and embark on this process, because nobody wants to build, the field that no one comes to for that much money. So I guess my concern is if you put these two sort of process flows together, you're probably into at least 1.5 years, if not a little bit longer, to create a solution. And where I see us coming with offices is like, we're right wedged into the, we're ready to go in construction, right? But I don't know that we're there. And so that is my ask for this committee, is where do you know that this is it? And do you want us to keep trudging on this, or do we need to take a step back and say, whoa, let's hang on for a second. Is this really where we want to be? And so the last slide is just sort of my recommendations, which are to decide as a committee whether or not you support this resolution. And I've listed out the relevant aspects of the resolution. They are all very construction oriented, and they have to be done by January, that construction piece has to be done by January 1st of 2025. That's what we are under a directive to do. So we're already in a very compressed timeline to do that. If you do not, what would be the alternate approach you'd want to advise council to take? And then, as a group, I would say either yes, continue on, in which case we'll keep going, or offer up an alternative. And I think to Juanita's point, you'd have to do that pretty quickly.
Thank you.
Mary, you ready to take questions now?
Yeah, or maybe I'll just check and see if Elise has any additions she wants to make to that.
Thank you. I think the only other thing I would add here is whatever we do, we want to set up to succeed in the long term. So we've talked a lot about the initial construction or the one-time setup of implementing something. But we'll also want to make sure that there's an ongoing way to care and feed that solution, whether that's a building and there's an identified customer that Maddie and my teams can continue to work with, or whether that's an engagement path through Civic Life. Just would love to include your thoughts about the ongoing responsible party and funding source for those, because we don't want it to be implemented and then sort of a question later. So that's the only piece I'd add at this point, and then happy to answer questions as well.
Thank you. I'll start taking questions. Just to give you guys a heads up, I'm going to be cutting off at around 90 seconds. We have a little bit over 10 minutes left of the discussion and I already have a lot of questions. So I don't want people giving really, really long questions. So Amy, go ahead.
So I just want to make sure I'm understanding what's happening here. So is City Council is the decision maker on this? So City Council is the decision maker on this, but we need to make recommendations we are in the position of needing to make a recommendation that they change their previous order, or otherwise we're sort of careening towards creating a bunch of buildings, bridges to nowhere. But how is this not a budget question? Like, we can't afford it. Like, we can't afford to staff the council. Like, how are we going to afford to do all this stuff? So can you just give maybe one sentence about why is this not being nixed for budget reasons first?
Yeah, it's a great question. There is no money for this. We will have to submit sort of a late decision package through something probably called the spring bump, which is where some final allocations of dollars can happen. But no, currently it would come away from something else. Something else in the budget would not get funded. So it would move forward in the mayor's proposed budget. And the council is the decider. And I think I think that they had a sense of what this could be and now are realizing the reality of it. And so they haven't demanded a recommendation from the GTAC, but they have asked for the GTAC's opinion. And I think that's because they are curious. I don't think that they want to make a decision just completely on their own, unilaterally. I think they want your input, but it would have to happen quickly.
Thank you. Yeah, what I've been saying to people, because I get that question a lot, Amy, is that if this is a priority for you, we have a budget. It just will be taken from something else. That's what a budget is, right? There could be money for this, but something else will lose out. It's all about priorities. Juliet?
Yeah, in a nutshell, I concur with Maddie completely, but I just want to make a few comments because some of these things have been bothering me for a while. I feel like there have been several decisions made about charter reform kind of prematurely, and we're trying to do backwards compatible outreach, and it feels very awkward to me. And this is another example of it, the resolution that council passed, and I think it's just they felt this pressure to do everything by January 1, 2025. Why? Why do we need to do that? It's almost like we need a phase 2 charter reform of these things that can be deferred until we have more information. And then Jose and I have already had a conversation. He and I are hearing different things. People in my neighborhood, those who have spoken out, don't see the need for an office there. It's different on the east side. They're a lot farther away from downtown. And, there's been so much analysis of many of these decisions and the programming, and then so little of others like this one and the districts and neighborhoods. And then what about the counselors? What about what they want? It seems like we'll get a much better product if they have some input. And for example, it depends on where they are. So I'm pretty sure that in my district, there's only one candidate running from my neighborhood. So why would we have an office here? Maybe it should be downtown or in Southwest, but we don't know who those people are going to be yet. And there have been, you know, in a previous meeting, Tate was mentioning the discrepancies over this whole issue, and they are glaring. And I'll just conclude by saying, I think we have a huge fiscal responsibility here. And just that presentation about the fleet building last week blew my mind. And that's the kind of thing that seems more important than rushing into this. So thank you for taking my comments.
Thank you, Juliet. And I will say I try not to mention my thoughts as chair usually, but since Juliet alluded to our conversations, I will say I'm from District 1. I live way far east. The conversations around the district offices out here look very different than they do when I talk to people inside. They say out here, the reason you can't find buildings out here is because Portland has never invested on the east side. So they're saying that is the reason to have district offices out here, not the reason against it. I have yet to find a single person that does not want single district, not even like it's divided. I have yet to find one person, including 5 different candidates from city council that are running out here, because they just feel it's probably not going to out here anyway, because everyone who's closer to downtown is going to decide for us and decide that the money's not worth going out to us. But that's a common theme with the east side and how they feel historically the east side has been treated by Portland. So that's just what I'm hearing. That it happens to also be my opinion. So, you know, sometimes when you speak to others, your opinion can influence what you hear, and I fully recognize that. But that is something that I've heard numerous times out here on the east side, that they really, really want a presence, not a one-off community engagement thing, not once a week. They want their counselors to be sitting in their office here, so when they go out to lunch, they go to east side businesses, not all the money going downtown. They want presence at all times because it brings more than just the one-off engagement. It's more than just about that. Sorry about sharing my opinion. I try not to.
Can I actually comment on that just
go
for a
ahead.
moment, which is that's exactly the kind of community input that I think we need to guide this decision as a city. Because right now what we have is money essentially going to the 4 districts equally, right? Maybe that's not the solution. Maybe it's all that budget goes to District 1, right? And because the districts have different needs. And so that when I think about community engagement and thoughtful planning, that is the sort of research that would inform such a decision of, okay, we're going to make an investment here and it's going to look like this and have this shape and scale. And that's a very different decision than just sort of rushing to a deadline and peanut buttering some funding over everybody the same way.
Noted. Harry?
Thanks. I saw in the slides that were distributed to us the decision point, and I kind of took that to heart, and I have a motion to make in order for GTAC to be relevant in the schedule, and taking a lot of what Maddie says very seriously. The one thing that Maddie didn't say is that maybe this decision is really the decision of the future council. Like the future council should be deciding what they want for themselves and for their offices, which would then fit the facilities and GTAC schedule a lot better anyway, to do that community engagement and understanding. So my motion goes something like this, and I'll cut and paste it into the chat in a second. But it would be the GTAC recommends revision to the council's direction on in-district offices in the resolution from November 29th as follows. 1, any final decision on in-district offices shall be left to the new council for budgeting and implementation after January 1st, 2025. In the meantime, council should remand the issue to GTAC and facilities. And 3, informed by and in cooperation with facilities and after community input and engagement specifically targeted to in-district offices, GTAC shall deliver a detailed recommendation from in-district offices to council on or before January 1st, 2025. So that lets us do the scoping and discussion and talk about whether these are even a good idea or not. I'm skeptical as council offices. I think a better solution, as we just talked about, is a full-fledged East Side service center for city services on the East Side, you know, a centralized office for lots of stuff, not just city council members. That's a whole nother discussion, a whole nother time. And so without getting bogged down in the details of the discussion, I think this gives us some breathing room. So that's the motion that I'll make. And I'll drop this in the chat.
Thank you, Terry. Maddie, quick question. Are these offices starting January 1st set up to have to be permanent offices, or do they want just temporary offices on January 1st? Or is there a difference? Or is it feasible to even have temporary offices?
That is the question we have, right? Which is the scope, as noted in that slide, is for us, there is no difference between temporary and permanent other than the duration of the lease. If you're going to invest all of this money to get to the target, you are effectively creating a permanent office. It's just the question is how long is that lease? And so then you have two problems. One is that the right solution, and how long should that thing be there, and is it in the right place, and all the other stuff. Yeah, you know, that is the question, is what is the program, right? What problem are we trying to solve, knowing that districts probably have very different problems?
So I have a question.
Yeah,
Sorry
can
for
you-
jumping
well-
the line, but this might help. When counselors now, because we see them do this, work from home, what kind of security and updates do they have there where we couldn't have a temporary office space, you know, that has similar security functions? Can you let me know about that?
You're asking the question they asked at the very beginning. Elise, I'm gonna hand it to you.
I can speak to information or cyber security versus physical security. And so I'm going to make a really maybe unfair assumption, and that is when counselors work from home, they're probably not seeing members of the public in their home. And so that may have a different feel in terms of physical security, but in terms of cyber security or the ability to connect to physical security if there is an issue at their home, then we would still be asking them to come through the city's network where we know that the data can be protected because we understand the transit of how that data works. And if they're dealing with community data, so let's say they're handling a person's tax question, or a person wants to come to them with an issue about an encounter with a police officer or with an ambulance, where they're talking about sensitive information for that community member. Either way, we have a duty to protect that information for that community member. And so our very baseline requirement is that they'd be using the city network so that we can do that. And that becomes more and more challenging and expensive at a place that where we might be including things like security cameras or broadcast quality versus at a home where we might be just using webcams like we are right now and maybe not having as much physical interaction. Does that make sense, Jose? Did I answer your question?
Yeah, thank you. Okay, we have no more than like 4 minutes left for this conversation. We have a motion on the floor, but I didn't hear a second.
No. I need to make a comment over that, Jose.
1 second, Juanita. Do we have a second for the motion first? Because if we don't have a second, then it's.
But I need to say that when we do that, I need to make sure that we it's too fast right now to make a motion to put this thing behind.
Juanita,
No, we need to have the discussion, Jose.
But if no one seconds it, it's like it doesn't exist. So does anyone second the motion?
I will.
It's the motion.
Okay, so now we have a second. Now, Juanita, you could speak on the motion.
Well, first of all, I want to thank Mari for articulating the problem that we have in terms of community engagement and the district office. I want to say that those two things are totally linked. And I agree with you, Mari, that we need to first decide what type of community involvement we're talking about. And every time I hear that having and I'm not talking about a building or anything like that, I totally agree that doing this construction thing is insane, about creating offices. However, I think it's important that we discuss this. We need more information to be able to make a recommendation. I think that giving ourselves 2 weeks or to a month to make a final recommendation to the council, it is worth it. Because we don't know, for example, I don't know, the city has right now 95 neighborhood associations. They have 7 neighborhood coalitions. Out of those, 3 are run by the city. So I want to know, have all of that information in terms of where are they located, these coalitions, the ones that are with the city, the specific location who is operating them, how do they operate? And then so we can really look into what don't we have right now. They're going to collapse those 7 coalitions into 4, 1 for each district. Well, what about then contracting with communities, some of those community organizations to do the work for us, and then also that could be a solution too. The issue about right now, there's a lot of discussion and really unhappiness about the way the funds were allocated by district. We hear people being really upset. No, I need to finish, Jose, because you've been also interrupting the opinions of the people, and so you took a lot of time. And I apologize, but I need to say it. Choose, you make me lose my track of my thinking. So the fact is that we need the time to think about this and discuss it, and then I will agree to that motion later on, at least a couple of weeks. There's a lot of information that we need to share and we need to discuss before going into that. I'm looking for an infrastructure. I'm not looking in terms of the council being, I read in the presentation that was sent to us that one of the goals is
I'm sorry, Juanita.
Council can be
I'm sorry, Juanita, I have to cut you off. There's 3 people waiting.
But you kept on talking, Jose. You kept on talking, interrupting the people who were giving their opinions. But I will leave it there then. But please then just, let us speak when people are speaking, because takes a lot of time away from.
Juanita, with all due respect, I'm also a committee member, and though I rarely share my opinion, I still do have a right to do so.
I agree with that.
Okay, Lori?
I just had a foundational question that I'm sorry if I missed, but who has owned the plans for district operations before GTAC? I mean, I understand what the resolution was, but then who is planning what's going to happen in there? Or was there no other planning besides what GTAC is now proposing doing?
We are the physical part of it.
Right.
We do not know, there is no program owner, and that was the concern we vocalized in the first work session in October, and you can go back and watch that. I don't know the date, but we vocalized that we did not know who the customer was or what the program would be, and therefore it was very difficult to build a physical solution when we did not have clarity on the customer or the program.
Okay, and even since then, there's been, even within the transition team, no ownership for.
There is no council, right? There is the
Yes,
there is no customer yet. The customer will be the counselors.
Sure, and the transition team has made plenty of proposals on what city council will do without having it in place. So I didn't know if there was anyone in the transition team that owned this before either.
No, I think that this is the group that's owning it. It's different to evaluate work scopes when, as bureaus, we're very clear about what we need these counselors to be doing to a degree, I guess I would say. So job descriptions are different than how do you want to interact with your space and with your constituency, and what do you need to be successful? And that was the question we posed back in October. It's our group, we made the decision independently to defer this to the new council because we felt we couldn't answer that question. So we focused on the things we knew were legally required, like City Hall. It was those discussions in October that pulled this back into the fore and directed us to complete the work by January 1st.
Okay, yeah, thank you. That helps me. Then my other comment is, I don't feel like, while I agree with a lot of what Terry proposed, I don't feel like GTAC is staffed or has necessarily the full skill set to do this whole community outreach. I agree that we could go out and get opinions from the community, but actually appropriately getting the opinions, I recognize we would need to partner with a bureau and we would need to partner with consultants to do this appropriately. I still don't think that GTAC should be the owner of that. I think we should take the time to get the right bureau to own it or the right person in the transition team, but I don't think GTAC or this subcommittee should be the owner for that. Thank you.
Thank you. We're now over time for this discussion. We're eating into onboarding, just heads up. So I did want to, unfortunately, Joe and Zach, if you could put your comments in the chat, I'm gonna have to call a vote on this motion. And it'll be a roll call vote. Julia, do you want me to do it, or do you want to do the roll call vote? I'll take care of it. Okay. We're voting on Terry's motion.
Jose, I think we need a couple more minutes. If we
Yeah.
vote on this motion
Yeah.
now,
Yeah.
it's just,
Yeah.
We can go on for more, but
It's just
those of you who
push-
really care about onboarding, then we're gonna have to cut into it. We can't.
Well,
this-
Jose, I
So-
apologize, but I feel like we're pushing this through in a way that I feel uncomfortable.
Juanita, we're not necessarily pushing it through. I
Well-
also don't support the motion. I don't think we should put off things to future council when some of them might only be on the council for 2 years. And if we let them decide, they might not ever be in office when they see it happen. So is it really future it's still going to be the wrong council deciding. So a council always decides the future for another council. I agree with you. I don't think we should push this through, but we need to vote on it because we have a lot of things to talk about today, unfortunately. Unless you guys want to take less time to discuss something else, like onboarding.
We could
So-
take 5 more minutes. The onboarding thing we can shorten up. It's pretty clear.
Okay.
It's a lot
We'll
less
short-
complex than this.
Okay, do you want, and does anyone have any amendments or anything to make the motion that you think might go with the motion?
look, what I want to say is that we've got really compelling priorities here, and we've got to find a way for it not to be either or. Everything that Jose said is absolutely true. What the community expects is that they are going to have access to their counselors in their community, and they're not going to expect that a year and a half after January 1st, 2025. They're going to expect it on day one. Everything that Maddie said and everything that Terry said is also true. In order to do this thoughtfully, it's going to require some time. On January 1st, or maybe January 2nd, there will be district offices. And if we don't find a way to set those up, they're going to be in coffee shops. They're going to have no security whatsoever. They're going to have no structure whatsoever. Counselors will be meeting with their constituents in their districts. It's what's expected by everybody, counselors and constituents. We need to find a way to square that circle. And I think that what Juanita is saying is true, that we need a little bit more time to be able to discuss this thoughtfully and come up with a way to set up district offices, temporary district offices that are good enough on January 1st, 2025, but that don't require the kind of investment that permanent offices do.
Exactly.
Maddie, you have a,
Yeah, so one way you could move that forward would be to modify or recommend modifying the resolution and eliminating expectations about security. Security is the driver of cost. Or you could potentially cap the budget. Right now, the budget to do what is scoped in the resolution is $1.8 million. And, you know, where that gives Elise and I heartburn, I think, is if you only have an asset that's up for 2 years, right? I mean, that's a really high life cycle cost. And so, you know, scaling that back, and we've been asked this question by a commissioner, is, well, why can't I just have a desk at the Kenton Firehouse? You can have that desk at the Kenton Firehouse. And I think somebody was asking about district coalition offices. You know, unfortunately, there's not a lot in District 1. They're all right on the boundary. But you can do that. What you can't do is then also have an expectation that it is secure, that you could host broadcasted community meetings without $2 million of investment and us continuing on. And I think Elise is writing in the chat, what I said, I think I was in the paper on this, is security requires a fiber network in order to access, or a fiber connection. And there's only a couple of ways to do that. And that's where it gets really expensive. So I think what you could do is sort of direct the informal creation of offices that do not have kind of these hard-coded office features, and allow commissioners to use them, you know, so essentially pulling back on the physical scope so that we are not then faced with somebody on January 2nd saying, well, gosh darn it, I thought this thing was going to have badge access, and I thought I could host a community meeting here and have it be broadcasted, and where's my open signal contract, and, you know, why is the window broken and nobody's responding? That is our reality, is those things all happen a lot. And so we are trying to manage expectations and say, if you are expecting this, it's going to cost this. If you are expecting this, you're going to get that. And that's the challenge, right? The resolution calls for this. And so that is what we're moving to deliver. If you want this, when that resolution will have to be modified, and we can deliver that, but it will not be ready for this on January 2nd.
Thank you. And I saw, Zach, you had a amendment.
I don't know if I can articulate an amendment to Terry's motion. I'm trying to formulate a comment, which is, I really feel like this process is narrow-minded in thinking that providing better access to counselors requires in-district offices for every single district. I think it needs to be organized around, what does access mean?
Yeah.
And access means ability to reach somebody who represents you in a reasonable time and whatever you define as reasonableness. And so, Jose, you actually had this idea, so it's not original to me, of having a east side or east side adjacent building that can serve those residents who are in District 1 and who are far afield in District 2 and District 3 even. And it's so myopic to think that in order to achieve access, it has to be every single district has the same thing. The concept of equality is not equity. That's it was mainly a comment. I'll try to figure out if there's going to be an amendment to the motion.
Okay, thank you. And one last comment, and then we'll go to the vote. Amy?
Okay, I'm with you, Zach, on trying to form an amendment here, but I think the amendment is that what we want to present to council is basically, here's the research that we have so far, and here's the kind of opinions on our committee. Like, we don't necessarily have a group opinion that we all have kind of consensed around or coalesced around, but we do have quite a bit of research at this point. Like, I think that it's extremely compelling that other cities don't take on district offices. There's stuff that we've learned that is relevant information that, regardless if we come up with a determination, we need to at least share with city council. So I don't know if this would be amendment or a separate motion, but maybe we could have a special committee meeting to form like a letter or like a writing committee to create our recommendations to council in line with the timeline that you shared, Maddie, so we can at least make sure that we are vocalizing these recommendations and act on their request from us. Yeah, I don't know how that.
Thank you, Emmy. And we'll vote on Terry's. Yours is duly noted. We can certainly do something like that. I've thought about it as well. Do something like that as well. But first, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, just one more comment on the East Side Service Center. So because I run facilities, I'll just let you know that's been a topic of discussion that has been in motion since I've been at the city in 2019. And some of you, I think, saw the Kirby Garage presentation last week for city operations. Facilities itself has an almost $500 million hole in terms of critical essential facilities that have no capital provisions for them, really. What we are launching is a long-range planning function that I think can help get to certain types of community investments that don't exist right now, especially in terms of physical access. So what I'm trying to express is there is not probably a way, again, absent a full programming effort, that we could stand up an East Side Community Service Center by January 1st. But I do think that having the discussion about what that is, what bureaus should be there, what counselors do there, how it's provisioned with the community is a really worthwhile discussion to have and not done in an ad hoc kind of whip fast kind of way, but to have in a legitimate and facilitated way. To understand what that looks like and should it have a park? Should it have daycare, right? Like all of these programming discussions about what does it mean to serve the East Side. And that is a legitimate, meaningful, facilitated, engaged conversation that should happen with the East Side that this process right now, as it's defined, would not do, right? Basically, we're going to rent a former dentist's office and we're going to put a sign on it. And that's what that looks like right now. So.
Thank you. We're going to go for a vote unless Terry, you have something to say about your motion.
Yeah, just quick closing argument, maybe. The idea here is behind my motion, at least, is to bias the time to have deeper conversations about the substance of what access looks like in the districts or council members, which is part of a bigger conversation that we as GTAC agreed to do about community engagement writ larger. And I think it's important to do it in the context like an East Side Service Center and equity versus equality. So I'd just like to buy the time to have that deeper community engagement to go along with our research, which is pretty clear about district offices. And so that was the point. I think I was trying to thread a needle that Maddie was trying to show me where it was on the slide, but if that doesn't work, it doesn't work. But the difference is the substance of what district offices are and what they look like is a much longer discussion that we need to have. But we need a decision on how facilities can move forward and how the council moves forward during this budget season. And I think pushing it off till January is a natural fit. So that's the closing argument.
Thank you, Terry. Okay, now we're gonna vote on Terry's motion. Remember, this is just a recommendation to GTAC for GTAC to consider this motion. That's always the case with our motions. Just to restate it, I'm not going to read it for time purposes, but it's mainly any final decision on in-district offices will be for the new council, not till 2025, January 1st, 2025. And in the meantime, this issue should be remanded to GTAC and facilities. And with that, I'm going to take a roll call motion, roll call vote. 5 are needed to pass. Amy?
Oh, yeah. Pass.
Destiny's not here. Joe?
I I can't vote for this without some provision for having meeting places for council members when they take office. No.
Jose, I also vote no. Juanita, sorry.
No.
Juliet,
Yes.
Lori,
No.
Terry, Zach.
I vote yes. I think that it's important that we have more time for a meaningful conversation and achieve the many different aims that we have in this conversation. And so I think we should have a bigger conversation with GTAC to suggest that recommendation.
Okay. I think that was 5. What was that for?
Amy, I didn't hear your vote. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I said it weird. I vote in affirmative, yes.
Okay, it's 4 yeses, so it's not enough to pass.
So it does not pass.
Can
Okay.
can I just say something really quick? I want to apologize to my colleagues and the committee and to Jose specifically for being so emotional, becoming so emotional and interrupting you and being so because that I was breaking one of our rules. So I just want to say that. Thank you.
No problem, Juanita. I know especially this topics like this can get emotional. We all care a lot about what happens in our city. So I totally understand. We're way over time, but I will be sending out an email with Julia to hopefully maybe get a group together, do a special meeting of this subcommittee, or do we need to vote on that, Julia, for something to consider on this topic?
I guess I was feeling that I was hearing. I mean, maybe it's something to affirm. I mean, you know, based on the timeline that Maddie offered, it seems like if GTAC has a recommendation in this space, it probably needs to be made at the March 13th GTAC meeting. And, you know, we can have time on that agenda, but if we do, GTAC will have the same conversation you all had with twice as many people, right? So I think if it's something that you want to move forward, I think this was Amy's suggestion, but have a meeting, an additional meeting of this subcommittee. You know, it would probably have to be next week or something to decide whether you can come to an agreement on what you would recommend to GTAC for it to consider on March 13th. That is probably something other than Terry's motion, right? So I just think, you know, that's up to you to decide. You can also decide you're not going to have a recommendation for GTAC's consideration on the 13th, but I guess I wanted to check in with folks about that.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think some of us didn't vote for the motion just because we didn't want the whole idea to be punted to 2025, but we do feel like there might be better or different ideas out there. Lori?
That's what I want to say. Is that somehow this motion, the people's comments diverged into, this is just going to be an opportunity to talk about this at GTAC. And if that's what saying yes to Terry's motion was, then I would have said yes too. I just don't agree with the motion. But if I do agree that we need to talk about it further, we're not done here. So I guess I agree with Amy. We need to get a special meeting. We need to write a letter. We need to do something before the 13th.
Maddie?
Sorry, I can't figure out how to raise my hand in the buttons. So I'm just raising my hand. I just want to also denote that really council has the final say here, right? So they're looking for GTAC input. And I think that March 13th, I think is what I heard. I think that is a fine date to provide input. But if there is no input provided, you know, council will act anyway, right? And so this is an opportunity, I think, for the GTAC to say what it wants. If it doesn't feel like the resolution as written really puts us in the right direction. So I might be focusing on what it is that you want council to do versus reacting to what is and then make that resolution. And so if that's, you want time to do community engagement and you want lo-fi pop-up offices by January 1st that have zero investment, and you want robust consideration of access for the east side, that conversation to be had at some point with the people who are the right people to have that, I would make that recommendation. In short, I would focus your time on what it is that you want to recommend that council does.
So, Julia, do we have to vote to meet, or can we just say we're meeting? No, okay. So we're gonna have a meet, Julia. If you could send an email to Juliet, me and Julia, if you're interested in serving on that. It will be next week, probably during the day. Julia?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm using special meeting, just an additional meeting is what I guess I mean. I don't think it's a different group of people. Like this subcommittee is charged with making recommendations to GTAC related to in-district offices. Obviously, if you can't come, I understand because it's going to be relatively short notice, but it would be a regular meeting of this subcommittee. It's just an additional meeting. So you don't need to tell me if you're interested. You're going to get the invite. So,
perfect. So next week, look out for an invite. Hopefully a lot of you can make it, and we'll continue. And that one will just be on the district offices. We'll continue this discussion. So Anita and Amy, unless something really important, we've eaten all the onboarding time, we're going to have a whole meeting on the in-district offices. Or do you need some, Juanita?
Just really quick, we have a meeting that we're going to be writing about community engagement already set up for that letter that we're going to write. So I think that as we go through that meeting, we should look into the big picture because that really the two issues are totally linked. I just a suggestion if everybody agrees to that.
Amy?
I just want to say I volunteer to help set up this meeting because I think there's like a few clear camps here. And I think it would be helpful if it's more like we're talking between option A, B, C for our recommendations and not like fishing around, you know, so there can be context before the meeting. So
yeah, Amy, reach out to me, Julia, and we'll work with you. Thank you.
To onboarding?
To onboarding finally, even though
Thank you all.
onboarding ended 5 minutes ago, according to my agenda. Okay.
Well, I could not be happier to introduce our recommendations here. This is kind of a pivot because this is a totally different vibe. This problem that we're facing with onboarding or the things that we're sort of looking at. So this was the work of myself, Joe, and Juanita, and we got together and really looked at onboarding and had the opportunity to meet with Tate and learn a little bit more from them about what's possible, what's on the plate already. So I'll make this pretty brief and we can talk much more deeply about it, but this is the letter. First main thing is that we want to could not say enough nice things about the work of Tate and how thoughtfully this has been approached. When we first approached this, it was the feeling of our subcommittee that it's very important that things happen before January 1 and that that there's a very specific emphasis put on how limited the time is going to be, and that it's very important that we create some kind of book or some kind of reference manual that's a live document. And the other key thing that GTAC be involved in this process. So not just kind of like after the fact, but as things are happening with deciding what that content will look like, that we expect to be involved as partners. The other things that we wanted to highlight the other things we wanted to really highlight in our recommendations is that is a goal setting process. So in addition to just training them on generally like, here's how you be a legislator, here's how the phone system works at City Council, it's really important that there be a goal setting session or something facilitated with the council early in their tenure. to make sure that there's like a real feeling of cohesion and that like the city is doing everything possible to facilitate that group teamwork. That's all I have to say about it. I hope I got it. Juanita and Joe, please jump in and
yeah, well, yeah, and I think that one of the areas that I just would like to really quickly address is that how strongly we feel that, and we hear from other people also about that the new council has the time to meet by themselves and have a facilitator that helps them to plan for their first year in office. And find their own priorities, because that will help them to coalesce as a team, a work team. Thank you, Amy.
I think the only thing that I would add is that I hope that GTAC is a partner in this planning process and not just sort of, checked in occasionally. I mean, we really want to work with Tate and whoever else gets involved with this on a hands-on basis. This is really important to build a foundation for the new council. I think in that same spirit, if there are elements of this that really would best be done by somebody outside of city staff, that needs to happen, that we really need to do this right, because we only have a chance to do it once.
All right, thanks for those comments. I just want to clarify a few things before we keep going. The goal today is to vote on these initial recommendations, and those will be distributed to GTAC on March 6th for their consideration at the March 13th GTAC meeting. And then we'll meet again the week of March 25th to revise the recommendations based on GTAC's input. And then staff will distribute the revised recommendations to GTAC on April 2nd for a final vote at the April 9th GTAC meeting. You might consider whether GTAC may sign off on the recommendations finally on March 13th, or whether we'll need another pass at it. And Amy already summarized everything. So I will just accept a motion to approve these recommendations in a second, and then we can discuss.
Juliet, I apologize. Would it be okay? Destiny isn't here, and she sent some thoughts by email on onboarding. Could I quickly share those with the group?
Sure.
I thought she was proposing changes, so thank you. So one, in general, she thinks the recommendations are great. She does think that we should prioritize the last bullet around stating clear delineation and expectation of individual members. And then potential additions, she thinks a team building exercise is needed since it's a new form of government. And then she says there should be a communications and outreach budget. And again, I wonder if she means during the sort of onboarding period for council members and their staff to connect with district-based communities, organizations, coalitions, schools, public agencies, etc. As in my mind, they will become the most visible leader for local government matters at the neighborhood level. Thank you.
Could I comment on just very quickly two of the things that she said? I think we can easily prioritize the last thing by just making it its own bullet. In terms of team building, I think the best way you do team building is to do real work together. And by designing this well, it's going to be team building. We don't need to separate team building from the rest of this. We just need to make sure that that element is highlighted.
Let's get a motion in a second, and then we can get everyone's comments at the same time. Is there a motion to approve these onboarding recommendations? Terry, how about a second?
I second. Oh, well, no, somebody else.
Yeah.
Was that Amy? I can't see everybody.
We endorse our own work. Yeah.
Second, Amy.
I think we did a good job on this.
Okay, so I'm just going to go in the order of who's on my screen. Terry.
Yeah, I was just going to comment sort of what Joe just said about team building. I'm sort of a skeptic as to team building as a onboarding thing, and that working together is what they need to do, and they should get some real life experience with that during the onboarding itself. I have a question similar to that, to the goal setting, though. I don't know that that would be successful in an onboarding with, I'm just a skeptic as to where that would go and how that would work and who would facilitate and what we're envisioning those goals would be. But other than that, I think that onboarding is great. It's going to be a lot of detailed work, and I think it might take some outside help to do that. So those were just the comments.
Okay, Amy.
I just want to speak quickly to one piece of our logic with these recommendations is that we were really laser focused on the very, very beginning of their tenure, because some of the things that we heard in the research from other cities and just learning about how other cities handle onboarding politicians is that it's very difficult after kind of folks are in office for very long. So just kind of framing the recommendations, and that I do think in the longer term, like a community outreach budget would be an awesome thing, but we're sort of really laser focused on making sure that it's the onboarding, like the very first like half mile that folks are going together, and not much further than that.
Okay. I don't see any other hands up right now. Is there more discussion or anyone else wanting to comment that I'm not seeing right now? Okay. So are we ready to vote on this? Amy?
Julia, I just was going to suggest, I don't know if it was made within the motion, but to have there be an amendment that the last bullet point of additions is its own bullet as suggested by Joe to emphasize. Otherwise, I have no other, I don't know if it needed to be amended.
Well, we can just call for a vote for the motion as amended. Okay, if there are no other comments.
Wait, Julia, Terry, since you made the motion, are you amenable to that?
Okay, Julia, did you want to call roll call?
Sure, I'm happy to. Amy.
Yes.
Destiny is absent. Joe.
Yes.
Jose.
Yes.
Juanita.
Yes.
Juliet.
Yes.
Lori.
Yes.
Terry.
Yes.
Zach.
Yes.
Okay, it passes. All yeses.
Okay, great. Thank you. We made up a little time there. So next slide, please. We're going to spend about, well, ideally 30 or 40 minutes on planning, community input gathering on future council districts and operations, although we just talked about quite a bit of that. The goal, however, is to leave the meeting with agreement on how we're going to get from where we are now to the dissemination of our initial council and district operations recommendation in June 2024. So we got a little ahead of ourselves with this, but that's fine. Next slide, please. We need to reach agreement on 6 key elements: timeline and methods for gathering input, audience, communications and outreach, education, key questions for community, and evaluation of community input. We have probably less than 10 minutes for each area of agreement, so please be concise and use the chat judiciously. And next slide, please. As a reminder, our timeline requires us to disseminate initial recommendations for public input in June, so our timeline works backwards from that point. We are proposing about a 1-month input period with open public comment, a community survey, and briefings from subcommittee members upon request by community groups. We're also proposing 3 community listening sessions, 2 virtual and 1 in person in East Portland. The sessions will have an educational presentation co-given by staff and a subcommittee member, followed by small group discussions. The questions we ask community in the sessions will be the same as those in the survey. 2 employee town halls have been scheduled for March 19th and 21st. At the end of the public comment period, staff will produce a public input report and the subcommittee will reconvene to review the input and draft the initial recommendations. Does anyone have any questions or proposed revisions to the timeline and methods? I don't see any hands. So Terry.
Yeah, I think this is the right process, and it has the elements correct and sequenced correctly. I'm worried that we're too late to influence the budget, though, in doing this. So if there were a way to have at least our, I guess it looks like May 15th says GTAC meets and gives feedback and initial recommendations. If there were a way to finalize those recommendations in late April somehow, so that it fits into the budget being released by the mayor May 2nd and the budget hearings and all that sort of stuff that happened in May. That's my only concern.
All right. Any other comments or hands? Sorry, my Zoom is a little bit bogged down. Okay. There are many roles for subcommittee members and staff in this work, and we'll be sending out another volunteer sign up document after this meeting for us all to sign up for activities. Next slide, please. The audiences proposed include those the community engagement plan says we will focus our engagement and outreach resources on, which are communities historically left out of City Hall and city decision making. In addition, we recommend reaching members of the city's advisory bodies, city employees, and candidates for city office. When you think about audiences, ask yourself, how do you want to be able to disaggregate public input? We recommend collecting demographic data that aligns with our stated audiences. Does anyone have questions or proposed revisions to the audiences and demographic data? Amy?
I just more have like a question. Is there like some kind of database? Like, are we using like a voter file, or how are we getting, is this from the city, this info, or where are we?
I can speak.
Yeah, can you just give me a little more information about like how would we shape this info?
Let me respond, but now I'm wondering if I fully understood your question. So typically sometimes when the city does community engagement, it will ask for those folks who engage with the city demographic information. So we have to proactively ask, and in no situation is a community member ever required to give the city any demographic data, for sure, right? So if we have many different modes of engagement that we are suggesting on the previous a couple slides ago. So demographic data collection would happen differently, and it would always be anonymized. So if I go to a community listening session, no one would know that Julia lives in Northeast Portland, right? So it's usually surveys. So we can, if we do an in-person community listening session, we can actually print out demographic data collection tools, hand them out to people, and some people will fill them out and some people won't. When people submit public comment, same thing, right? We can ask these questions. What is your zip code? Some people will fill it out, some people won't. But we will be able to say we engaged 500 people. Of those, 60% gave demographic. We have demographic data about. Of those, 25% live in East Portland. So it is all voluntary. It depends on the method by which the engagement is happening, what the tool is for the collection.
Okay, there were a bunch of hands up and now there aren't. Am I missing anybody? Zach?
I was only making sure that if this was voluntary data collection.
Okay. All right, well, if there, let's go to the next slide, please. So in order to outline the opportunities to engage, we propose the following: the transition website, city employee newsletter, the civic life newsletter, the transition newsletter, social media posts that we can all available for us to reshare, emails to organizations engaged through charter reform and the transition, email to city advisory body staff, auditor's office, e-news, and neighborhood papers. Does anyone have any questions or proposed revisions to the communications and outreach plan?
Jose has his hand up.
Jose.
I just want to make sure that some of this is also in different languages, instead of all English.
Tate.
I can.
Sorry. If you're supposed to respond, thank you, Julia.
Yeah, I mean, I would, social media posts can be done in English and Spanish. Could you maybe point out, Jose, which you're requesting and in which languages?
Like the website, at least Spanish and the top like 2 or 3 other languages spoken around town. We just did a Spanish only outreach, and there was a lot of requests for that. There's not a lot of that out there, so yeah.
Thanks.
Okay, how about Juanita and then
Yeah,
Joe?
thank you. I just want to make sure that when we talk about the coalitions, where are they? Yeah, the independent coalitions, that there is a connection to all of the neighborhoods also, because they are the ones who are the closest to the community.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
Joe?
Yeah, I would just hope that all of our outreach and engagement is not a series of one-offs, and that every time we engage anybody, we essentially get them on our list to reach out to them for everything we do afterwards. So I would hope that we do follow-up communication with that whole long list of people that we've already met with, and that everybody that engages on this subject gets informed about things that we do going forward.
Okay. I don't see any other hands. Any last comments on this?
I'll just highlight what Zach put in the chat. The survey should also be in different languages.
Okay. Next slide, please. So last week we were emailed a draft education presentation for the community. It's about a 30-minute presentation that will be presented by city staff and a subcommittee member. We will record it and post it online. Community groups can request a briefing from subcommittee members and staff, and it will be given at 3 community listening sessions and 2 employee town halls. We asked people to come to this meeting prepared to share any proposed revisions to the presentation. Does anyone have any questions or proposed revisions to the education presentation? Doesn't look like anyone does. So
Julia, Terry has his hand up.
sorry, I'm just having trouble seeing these as fast as they come up. Okay, Terry and then Lori.
Yeah, are we talking about the substance of the presentation at this point? Okay. I think it's way too long. Both the staff half and the GTAC half are pretty long. And I have some ideas about specific edits and some other comments that I hope there's an opportunity to give to you all at some point. And I realize you're on a tough schedule, and I'm happy to do that promptly. And just, I guess, generally, I feel like we're not specific enough about what we're asking the input on when it comes to some of the council operations. But I'll provide you my comments on that. And I see in the chat that there's a deadline and we'll meet it. But anyway, those are comments based on what I saw so far.
Lori, did you have a comment? And then I'm going to let Julia call on people because my Zoom is kind of behind.
It was a similar comment to, I guess, what Terry's talking about and his earlier comment too. I was trying to quickly go through the speaker notes to understand and being really clear on the purpose besides education. What is actually besides, it looks like we're just going to be providing some written documentation to future city council on what we heard from the community. And I guess that's what I wanted to clarify. If it's not to influence budget, is all we're doing here is just gathering input to give to the future city council and what's going to be done with it. I guess I wanted to be more specific to the community of what we're really doing with this information and how we can feel like we're actually influencing something besides just providing more input that has already been gathered for years. So.
I can speak to that, I think. So in GTAC's work plan, we say that this subcommittee is going to be is responsible for making recommendations to the full GTAC on a set of things, and that then GTAC will have a set of recommendations specifically for the future council about how it should do its work. And so you are in the initial kind of engagement phase to guide the recommendations that this subcommittee drafts, right? The ones that will go to the full committee, maybe May 15th or earlier. And then there'll be another community engagement phase over the summer. And then in the fall, you all will finalize these recommendations specifically for the future city council. At least that's the GTAC work plan is initially made, because I would also say some have budgetary implications and some don't, right? Some of it's like how the future council is going to do its work, how community is engaged in future council decision-making. And there are elements potentially of this engagement that have occurred in the past, but actually generally not. We've never asked these questions because they're very specific to a new form of government. And so we're asking people in this new form of government, where council has a totally different set of roles and responsibilities, how do you want to shape that future council's work, right? And here are different ways you could do that. How do you want to do it? And yes, all we're ultimately doing is leaving recommendations for a future council that can say yay or nay. But I think having research that you've done, having heard from Portlanders, that's probably going to be meaningful to them and certainly is going to accelerate their decision-making about how they want to do their own work.
Okay, thank you for the reminder of how we got to this and what the future plan is for it. And perhaps I'll provide some feedback on updates to the presentation that outlines that a little bit clearer.
I take your point. I do think that's probably missing in the presentation. So thank you.
Any other comments about this? And I will note that you can submit proposed revisions through the end of Sunday and just email them to Julia. But I'll pause again in case there's anything. Okay, I don't see any other hands. Next slide, please. We are proposing 7 questions for community. These questions will be posed in small group discussions at the community listening sessions, as well as through survey, public comment, and briefings in community. For some context, this is about the right amount of questions that can be covered in the 1-hour small group discussion, so we cannot add or delete too many questions. I'll pause for a minute so everyone can review the questions, and I can run into the next room and get some notes that I wrote down.
I'll go ahead and pipe up. Because I think this is related to what I said in the last on the last slide. There are some specific things that we as GTAC want to be recommending relating to council operations. One of them, for example, is committees. We have thinking on committees, how they should work and how public involvement should work in committees, how they should be run. I feel like we need to be more specific about that. Like, here's what we're thinking, what city council meetings might be like in the future that are different from what they are now. And so some of these questions are very general, and I think that's good to see where people are and speak generally about their experience with representative government. But I think we have specific questions that we want to answer, so we should ask. And I don't know if these are like maybe sub questions once you get into the listening session or something, to keep the conversation flowing. But I'm not sure that general answers to general questions get us to specific answers, specific questions.
Looks like Jose's hand is up.
Amy, you first.
And Amy. Amy, you're on mute still.
This is probably a dumb question that I just missed when I stepped away, but who's doing this outreach? This is the work of the future. Who's doing this community engagement? This is the GTAC engagement that we're doing, like our public engagement. Okay. Well, to that point, I think, to Terry's point, I think that there's kind of different things happening here. There's like some technical expertise that we're offering, where we have some technical recommendations about how the council should be structured. And we do want community input, but I think these need to be framed in a technical council operations versus like general access to council and like general good governance stuff. There's like 2 things that are happening that's worth us acknowledging that when we're doing the community engagement stuff.
Jose.
Okay, I could see certain specific questions. I see the value of that around specific things we want to know. But what I personally don't think we should ask is, we think that this is what should be the way it is. What do you think about that? Because whenever you frame questions like that, you tend to get people to just agree or put the things that are already given. I want, if you're asking about committees, I'd rather have a question that says, councils work with committees. Which committees do you think are important for a council to have? And then us be able to take all that data and then see how it matches up to what our research shows. Because research only goes so far. There's also a people aspect that we have to care about, and the fact that Portland's different aspect. If anything I've learned from all our research is that every single city does it different. There isn't one correct answer. So I don't want us to say, well, we agree that this is the most correct for us, so the public should just agree with us. I kind of want to leave it so that we have them open to say what they feel.
Okay, so I have my hand up and I'm going to call on myself. I think this and then after me, Joe. This kind of goes to what Terry was saying. Let's just kind of ask what we want to know. And this last question to me just sounds a little bit bureaucratic
Yeah.
about responsibilities for community engagement. And maybe it could be more user-friendly, sort of like, would you visit a bricks and mortar office to talk to your counselor, or are there other ways that you would like to engage with them or work with them? So I'll just put that out there. Joe, is your hand still up? Yes.
Yeah, it is. It seems in all of this that we've got sort of two different groups that we're addressing. One is people who have been involved in the city's process and the council's process in particular, and we want to make it better for them. We want to make it more accessible. We want them to feel more effective in their advocacy. And then there are people who have not been engaged at all, and we want to find ways that make it accessible enough that they become engaged. And so I think in addition to the demographic questions that we ask, we should ask people how they have been involved with council processes in the past, so that we know sort of which of those buckets people are fitting into, and we have a context for their answers to these questions.
Okay, Juanita.
Yes, I agree with the comment that Joe just made. And also regarding the last bullet, we keep in focusing on how the council members will go into the community, but what I really looking at is, and I would like to share this different view of it. I think that what we're looking at is how do we develop a structure within the city as a whole that those 4 districts can organize themselves so they can provide the input to the council. It doesn't mean that the council has to be there all of the time, but I mean, they could meet on a monthly basis with the representatives of that district to talk about their plan for their own communities. So so it's like we're missing something. It's like we're not talking about the councilors being engaged with the community. We want the community to be able to have access and provide their input into the city governance process. I don't know if that makes any sense, but anyway, so that goes along with Joe's comment.
Jose, did you have another comment?
Yeah, just real quick. I agree with Juanita. And one thing we learned and heard a lot from, we spoke to a group of women in Spanish recently. This is great for groups that engage with city council. And we're always talking about it in those terms. But the problem is a lot of the people we need to be reaching more don't engage with city council.
At all.
So they might not come to these things. We need to find a way to engage those people. So asking them, would you go to the office? No, all of them would say no, because they already don't. We need to find alternative ways to try to reach people. And unfortunately, those key demographics that we want to target, people eat 72nd, people of color that and speaking other languages, those are the people that don't do this kind of engagement.
All right. Are there any other hands up? Amy? No. Okay. I don't see any others right now. So,
Sorry, Juliet, while you're kind of moving on. So just similar to the whole presentation, which these key questions are in the presentation and sort of the foundation of it, we can take any kind of edits through Sunday. So we'll come into work Monday and look at all of your input, right? So anything that you send between now and then, I know it's a lot to take in, but take another look. I suggest reading the speaker note version of the presentation. I think that's probably more helpful than just looking at the slides, and we'll do our best to incorporate your feedback early next week. Thank you.
all right. If there's nothing else, let's go to the next slide. When the public input ends, staff will provide all of the raw data as well as an analysis report. The purpose of the analysis is to figure out how we will use the input to guide our draft recommendations. We are proposing to analyze the data based on the city's core values of anti-racism, equity, transparency, communication, collaboration, and fiscal responsibility, and the desired outcomes for a city that is coordinated, accountable, accessible, responsive, and equitable. As a reminder, the community desired outcomes come from a report the transition team to synthesize past community input efforts at the city. Does anyone have any questions or proposed revisions to this evaluation? Can tell we're getting to the end of this meeting. Terry.
Is this is our evaluation? This is how we're evaluating the input?
The city's evaluation.
City's evaluation?
So we have a staff member who has these, so we have a pretty quick turnaround time from the end of this engagement phase, sort of the end of the public comment period, and you all getting back together to sort of debrief that input. And then the whole point of the input is to use it to guide your recommendations, right? So we can give you all the raw data, but how is staff going to sort of make sense of the input that comes in? And so how are you all going to use the input to sort of analyze, do you want to make this recommendation or this recommendation, right? Like, what are you using to guide your own decision making? And what we're proposing is one, and this is sort of related to something Lori said earlier, we actually use what community has told us for years about what they want out of their city government, right? We don't have to wonder, oh, I wonder what people want, right? People have told the city over and over again, they want it to be coordinated, they want it to be accountable, right? And there's definitions of what that means from community input. So if you're weighing, this recommendation or this, you want to go back to what people have said that they want of their city government and ask yourself, is this recommendation or this recommendation more likely to lead to a city that is X, Y, and Z? And then in addition, we have at the city core values that GTAC also has in its work plan to do this work in a way that aligns with the city's core values. So, does this recommendation or this recommendation more likely to advance the city's core value of X, Y, or Z? And we are trying to say we can help a little bit with just the way that we report on the community input.
Thanks for clarifying that. Any other comments or questions on this? I don't see anyone. So in that case, we'll go to the next slide and I'll turn it back over to Jose to review next steps.
Okay, guess we caught up. Make sure you send, first of all, before I continue next steps, any updates to these, please do go back over the slides. Please do go back over the slides, read through it, and any updates you might have, please send them over to Julia and myself. We want to make the engagement as good as possible, so with your feedback, we'll be able to do that. The next steps, the meeting recording will be posted on the committee's website. At the March 13th GTAC meeting, we'll report our initial onboarding recommendations and an update on our community engagement plan. The next subcommittee meeting will be the week of March 25th. If you haven't already, please complete the doodle poll in your email so we can schedule it. And there's also going to be another doodle poll after this meeting for the meeting about district offices. So please complete that one as soon as you get it, so that meeting can be scheduled for next week. Next slide, please. And we did not expect the second half of the meeting to go as fast as possible. We actually scheduled half an hour more that we shifted over to the industry conversation, but We've concluded everything, so the meeting is adjourned. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.